clothing. In Bible times, men and women wore similar styles of loose clothing. Underneath their outer clothes, people wore a kind of undershirt called a tunic. A tunic could be made of linen, wool, or leather. It reached down between the knees and the ankles and often had no sleeves. In warm weather, the tunic might be the only garment worn by the lower class of people. At the foot of the cross, Roman soldiers gambled for Jesus' tunic. In cold weather, people wore a robe over the tunic. The robe was held in place by a long sash wrapped around one's waist. The sash also served as a kind of loose pocket for carrying small objects. The Bible mentions the sash as a symbol of readiness. The outer garment, or robe, could also be used as a light blanket during nights. For this reason, Israelite law required it to be returned to its owner before sunset. Jewish men sometimes wore a special garment required by the law of Moses. It was a kind of rectangular shawl worn over their shoulders. Each of its four corners had a long blue thread or tassel. These were intended to be a reminder of God's commandments. When the woman who suffered from internal bleeding touched Jesus' clothing, it was probably one of the tassels that she touched. When Jewish men prayed, they also tied a very small leather box to their forehead or their forearm. It was called a phylactery. The box contained special verses from the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Jewish men understood the Mosaic command to mean that they were to physically bind the commandments to their head or to their forearms. Sandals were the most common footwear worn. They were made from a thick piece of leather or wood. They were not buckled, but rather were tied around their ankles. Men wore a kind of turban on their heads. This was a long sash wrapped several times around their heads. The head covering was worn for protection from the sun. Until the time of the New Testament, it was not a religious duty for a man to cover his head. However, married Jewish women were expected to keep their hair bound and covered up.